continue with the next lecture, Kubernetes architecture. In this section, I'm going to talk about the various master components and various worker node components. So we looked at the high level architecture of Kubernetes, where we have a master and a worker node. And there are many components within the master, and there are many components that runs on the each of the worker node. Let's go ahead and simplify each of these components of the master and the worker node. So first, let's talk about the master components. There is the Kube API server, the etcd, the Kube controller manager, Kube scheduler, and the cloud controller manager. These are some of the master components. I have a Kubernetes cluster deployed already, but I'm going to cover how to deploy it. Let's verify how many nodes do I have in my cluster. Kubectl get nodes. There is one master and two worker nodes. This is bare minimum what you need for at least for the POCs. But for production, there are different requirements which I'm going to discuss on. But this single cluster can also be virtually divided into multiple virtual clusters with the help of namespaces. So by default, when you deploy a Kubernetes cluster, there are many namespaces gets created, such as default, kube node lease, kube's public, kube system. So if you are confused about what namespace is, let me help you with that. If I go to kubernetes.io, which is an documentation, and if I search for a namespaces, a Kubernetes supports multiple virtual clusters backed by a single or same physical cluster. And these virtual clusters are called namespaces. So a namespaces provide a scope for names. And the namespaces are a way for you to divide your cluster resources between multiple users. Maybe just take an example of one of the organizations such as Cisco or Cognizant or whatever the organization, the large organizations. If they have a Kubernetes cluster deployed for the use of developers, and there may be developers working for a different teams. For each of the team, we can create a separate namespace from the same cluster and also apply some limitations on how much of the cluster resources that each of the team or a namespace can leverage. So namespace basically allow you to virtually divide your single cluster into multiple clusters, plus control how much of the cluster resources such as memory, CPU, and storage can be leveraged. And how many applications can they deploy? How many services can they deploy? How many deployments can they have? All that can be controlled by the quota. And quotas are applied on namespaces. So to keep it simple, namespace is nothing but a virtual cluster. Now, there is the kube system as the namespace within which some pods will be created by default when you deploy the Kubernetes cluster. If I run the command kubectl get pods, it is saying there are no resources in the default namespace because by default, the namespace is what? A default. But if I want to get the or list the resources of a different namespace, I should be mentioning the name of the namespace followed by -n. -n is to mention the name namespace. Now, within the kube system namespace, there are many parts already running, and these are control plane parts, out of which there are some parts which are running on master. There is the Kube API server, the etcd, the Kube controller manager, the Kube scheduler, which is what I'm talking about as the master node components. Okay. Let's first understand the Kube API server, which is one of the important Kubernetes master component. So you as an administrator or as a developer or a user, you run the kubectl commands. Those command instructions are sent to whom? The Kube API server. So it is the only Kube API server to whom we can talk to access the Kubernetes cluster. So Kube API server provides the REST interface into the Kubernetes control plane and a data store. All of the clients, including nodes, users, any application interaction to the Kubernetes cluster is done strictly through a Kube API server. There's no way for us to directly interact with any of the component of a Kubernetes cluster. It is only the Kube API server to whom we can interact with. But Kube API will interact with internal components to make what you expect. Kube API server acts as the gatekeeper to the cluster by handling the authentication. Are you a valid user? Authorization. Are you allowed to what you're requesting for? Request validation. Is it something doable? Mutuation and admission control between the internal components. All that is done by the Kube API server. And Kube API server runs on the master, not on the worker nodes. Let's take a look at the second component, which is the etcd. etcd acts as the cluster data store, which provides a strong, consistent, and highly available key value store, which is used to persist the cluster state. So when a Naushad, who's a developer, places a request to the Kube API server that he wants to create a application or a pod, that information going to be stored in the etcd to ensure for some reason that application is terminated, that can be recreated. So etcd will have the information about anything and everything about the Kubernetes cluster, including there are how many total number of servers, out of which there are how many master servers, and there are how many minions or worker nodes. There are how many pods running in the Kubernetes cluster. There are how many services running in the Kubernetes cluster, and there are how many deployments, replica sets, replication controllers. About everything will be stored in etcd. So etcd acts as the cluster data store, which is just the key value pair and persists a cluster state. And it is only the Kube API server which has access to etcd. And it is the only Kube API server which can read and write into the etcd. None of the other components of the Kubernetes has direct access on the etcd. It is only the Kube API server. For the purpose of what? The consistency of the database of the etcd. So it is only the Kube API server which has access on the etcd. The next component to discuss is the Cloud Controller Manager, which is an optional component, which basically provides a cloud provider specific knowledge and integration capabilities into the Kubernetes cluster. What if you want to leverage the AWS-based S3 storage integrated with your Kubernetes, or some cloud provider specific feature you want to integrate with Kubernetes? It is the Cloud Controller Manager which can make it happen. The next component to discuss is the Kube Controller Manager, which is the primary daemon which manages many core component control loops, such as replica set, deployment, stateful set, HPA, there are many different core components of Kubernetes that a kube controller manager manages. One of the other responsibility of the kube controller manager is to monitor the cluster state via the API server and steers the cluster state towards the desired state with the help of etcd. One of the examples that I can give you is if you requested for running 3 replicas of your application, it is the responsibility of the kube controller manager to ensure there are 3 replicas of your application or a pod is running at any given point of time. The next comes the kube scheduler. The kube scheduler evaluates the workload requirements and attempts to find the best node on which the resource can be created, such as pod. So when you place a request to the Kube API server to create a pod, Kube API server contacts the Kube scheduler. Hey, give me the best node on which this pod can be running. Kube scheduler can do a lot of things in the backend, such as it might check is the user has any hardware requirement, a specific hardware requirement. Is the user has any requirements such as affinity and anti-affinity to ensure the application running on a same node or on a different node. Is the user has any other custom resource requirements such as the pod must be running on the node which has SSD as a storage. The pod must be running on a node which has Intel or AMD based processor. And the pod should run on only on the node which has about 1 terabyte of memory or 64 GB of memory. Such requirements can be supplied to the Kube API server, and Kube API server hand that over to the Kube scheduler. And Kube scheduler will first filter from the available nodes and then decide based on the score if there are multiple nodes satisfies the requirement. So to keep it simple, it is the kube scheduler within the Kubernetes which identifies on which node your application or pod must be running because it is a cluster of those worker nodes or minions. Let's now talk about the node components. Before that, I was talking about the master or control plane components. I executed a command kubectl get pods from the namespace kube system and get me all of the pods matching the pattern master. There is the kube API server, which provides the REST interface into the Kubernetes cluster. The etcd provides a cluster data store. The kube controller manager provides many core components within the Kubernetes. The kube scheduler, which help identify the node on which the pod can be scheduled to run. Now let's take a look at the worker node components. There is the kubelet, the kube proxy, the container runtime engine. These are some of the worker node components. Let's first understand the kubelet. So the kubelet and the container runtime, in my case, I'm using the Docker as the container runtime. Both run as the system service or as a daemon. Okay, so kubelet basically acts as the node agent, which is responsible for managing the pod lifecycle on its host wherever it is running. I have 2 worker nodes. If I go to my cluster and run the command kubectl get nodes, I have 2 worker nodes, right? If I create a pod, right, kubectl run a pod named web01 using the image nginx. Pod gets scheduled by the kube scheduler. Let's see where is that pod got scheduled by running the command kubectl get pods -o wide. So the pod got scheduled to run on kube node 1. So once the kube API server hand over the instructions to the kube scheduler or hand over the requirements to the kube scheduler, kube scheduler identifies the best node on which the pod can be scheduled. Then kube scheduler provides that information back to the kube API server, and the kube API will contact that specific worker node based on the kube scheduler recommendation, and the kubelet will ensure that particular pod will be running at any given point of time. And the kubelet will report back to the kube API server about the pod is created. But how will that pod be created? The kubelet will talk to the container runtime. In my case, it is the Docker. So on the worker node, let me switch to one of the worker nodes such as kube node 1. If I check system.catl status of kubelet, which is the daemon, as you can see, the kubelet is running. Let me check the Docker. Docker is also running. So behind the scene, what happened is Docker created the container, Docker container ls. As you can see, there is the nginx container running. So the instruction from the kube API is being sent to the kubelet running on the node 1. The kubelet communicated to the Docker and requested a container to be created. So behind the Kubernetes, there is some container runtime needed. In my case, I'm using the Docker as the container runtime or container engine, right? So all the commands that you learned yesterday about the Docker will continue to be used because in my case, I'm using Docker as the container runtime. If I also do a Docker image ls, there's images that got pulled such as nginx for my nginx based pod or application to be running. Let me exit out of the node. So on the worker node, you will have the kubelet, which is the node agent running. And the kubelet can understand the configuration information in either YAML or JSON format. Generally, the YAML or JSON data that we supply to create the resource, we call that as the manifest. And these YAML or JSON can be a local file or can be the HTTP endpoint. Maybe you have the GitHub or some version control system integrated with Kubernetes. Are you maintaining these YAML or JSON files on those version control systems? And while creating a resource, you want to reference those endpoints. And Kubelet can also act on the etcd watch changes. It's too early to discuss on what do you mean by etcd watch. I'll discuss when it is needed. Right now, the configuration information about creating the resource can be supplied to the kubelet either in the YAML or JSON format, which can be a local path or can be the HTTP endpoint. Of course, this information comes from the kube API server. The next component we want to talk about is the kube proxy. Kube proxy manages the network rules on each of the node and performs the connection forwarding for Kubernetes cluster. Also provides the load balancing capability. Whenever you create a service in the Kubernetes for your application, so that your application is exposed, it is the kube proxy behind the service which provides a load balancing capability. When you hit a service in the Kubernetes, meaning when you try to access an application that is running in Kubernetes, it is the kube proxy which receives that request and forwards to the one of the replica of the pod behind the kube proxy or behind the service. So kube proxy, which is one of the worker node component in Kubernetes, provides the load balancing capability in Kubernetes. And kubeproxy can operate in user space mode, IP tables mode, and IPVS mode. The default happen to be either IP tables or IPVS. If your server supports IPVS, it is IPVS. Otherwise, it is just IP tables. the container runtime. In my scenario, I'm using the Docker as the container runtime. But Kubernetes can support many different container runtime interfaces. Now, Docker is not anymore going to be a default container runtime interface. Kubernetes is being very open to allow any container runtime interface to be integrated and operated behind the Kubernetes. Kubernetes supports Containerd, CRI-O, RKT, Kata, Worklet. There are many more list of container runtime interfaces that Kubernetes supports. In my case, I'm using Docker as the container runtime interface. Meaning, whenever the Kube API server sends instruction to the kubelet, kubelet can talk to any different container runtime interface. In my case, it is going to talk to the Docker as the container runtime interface. So pod is nothing but a group of containers. They live together and they die together. Pods share the IP address, secrets, labels, and volumes. Within a single node, you can have multiple pods, and multiple pods can have one or more containers. Some of the examples of the pod include you want to have a WordPress and MySQL containers as part of the single pod, Elastic Logstash Kibana as single pod, Nginx and Logstash running within the single pod. So, but the recommendation is one container per pod is a recommendation. You don't want to run multiple containers within a single pod, but if you wish to, you can. So for each of the pod, the IPC namespace, the network namespace, the PID namespace, all that gets created. Each of the pod will be named. Each of the pod will be given an IP address. But if you have more than one container within the pod, they can still be able to communicate, even though the containers will not be given an IP address, but they can communicate using local host. As if on a single server, you're running the web server also, a database server also, and you can make them communicate because they're listening on two different port numbers. So it is local host colon port number of a container is how they can communicate within the same pod. So we looked at the simple YAML manifest for the pod to be created, the API version, the kind of the resource, the metadata, which includes the name of the resource, in specification, the containers that you want to create, the image to be used, the name of the container. This is the simplest of the YAML for you to create the pod within the Kubernetes. So within a single node, you can have multiple pods. Within a single pod, you can have one or more containers. The recommendation is to have one container per pod. That's the architecture of the Kubernetes.